Hey guys, so this week with GameTree, we started off with a meeting with the accelerator and the person in charge of writing grants that go to the Polish government that go back to the Polish companies for research and development projects. And the Polish government somehow secured 20 billion euros from the EU for this, more than any other countries. And they need to spend this money, so that's a lot of the reason we're here. And it's pretty likely that we'll get a 5 million euro grant to apply for a lot of different kinds of patents. And it turns out actually that there's money set aside specifically for gaming, so it's even easier to get that money if you're in this industry. But at the same time, it's a little bit tricky because there's so much to do with shorter term fundraising, planning trips, growing the app, that applying to these grants is a really long process, and it's hard to dedicate the time towards it when the money wouldn't come in for like 8 or 9 months, and we already have more pressing stuff to pay attention to. Another thing is the Patreon account is growing. I'm surprised really by like the average ticket size being like $25. I thought it would be like $5 average, so I'm really blown away by that. And thank you if you're watching this again. It's like really makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing. And it's especially inspiring because as sort of I wasn't psychoanalyzing myself. Based on my own psychoanalysis, I was thinking about business strategy, and I realized that my kind of personality type isn't actually the best for business because I'm primarily driven by personal values. And if you're somebody who like thinks strictly off of like personal logic or group logic and values, it's easier to do business because it's easier to accept just pure profit as a motivation, or to be able to be selfish and just care about money. But for me, GameTree is just a vessel to do big things. So I realized that I really do need to try as hard as I can to make a movement out of this, to get people on board with the vision and make this a special company that really does something bigger in the world than traditional large companies do at that stage. And this Patreon account, that's just seeing the support makes me realize that this is happening, but also makes me realize that even like, for example, with this blogging, being open about this stuff is important if there's going to be this sort of trust and belief in this sort of a system. So that kind of puts me on the right track. At the same time, though, I'm not a great speaker. I'm not a strong artist. I'm not the kind of like rock star person that I think can just be like a charismatic figure at this. So I'm still struggling to figure out how to be able to garner masses and communicate a vision for something that I think is actually really amazing for the world and helping basically people be able to make more of a living doing the things they love, and for all of us to be able to discover the best options in the world, not just the highly selected few that are just from the biggest companies or artists that kind of monopolize all of attention and make it so other people can't afford to get their word out there. Another thing with the hotel that we've been staying in last week is it's been kind of a nightmare. Every day last week, 5 days in a row, was 7 a.m., hammers and drills above my room. And every day I went down and told them like, hey, it's 7 a.m., could there not be construction right above me? And every time they said that, oh, it's supposed to start at 9, and that it wouldn't happen again, and every time it did happen. So that was a nightmare. Went into an Airbnb for the next couple of days, and then just last night checked into a hostel while we're continuing our apartment search. The manager is going to be helping us look for stuff. And this is kind of fun and interesting as a way to like meet people around Warsaw, and it's just sort of a fun environment, but it's not the most productive, and you're not going to get the best nights of sleep being in a hostel. So we're sort of like working through that stuff right now. It's also a bit tight, so we're staying in like one of the bigger rooms because until the seed round coming up, I don't have much money. So I just have to kind of conserve as much as possible in the meantime. Another thing that's been an issue is frustration with investors. It's really hard to communicate this GameTree vision. It's pretty big and innovative, and it's very encompassing of a lot of different kinds of things. The data can be used in a large variety of services. The recommendations are important, and also the amount of analytic insight and what we can like share with the kinds of like depth and attributes and information is pretty beyond anything that exists. But a challenge, again, and this relates back to the psychology, is most investors are seeking 100% pure profit, and that's the language they look at. In most business models, it's easy to measure, okay, we advertise, this is our cost of acquisition, this is our profit margin, here's the profitability, we'll have this much money at this time. GameTree is sort of a business model where if it works, it could make hundreds of millions to billions of dollars very easily. Even if it fails, there's so many different places that it can fall where it's useful, that because it's such a unique business model that is sort of needed in this time period. that it almost is irrelevant to do some sort of microanalysis, but investors really want to see that because that's just what they're trained to look at and at the metrics. So I'm having a hard time communicating that sort of thing. But if I do equity crowdfunding in the future, I think that'll be a lot easier because it's, I think, more interesting as a consumer to get excited about this than as an investor trying to look at little details when we have a lot of different ways to monetize, and they could fluctuate very widely. For example, with advertising, we have potential to do highly personal advertisements where they're almost more like entertainment and information than spamming people. That's the industry is sort of moving that way anyways, but we basically could do it a lot more than normal, but we can't really assign an ROI on that because it's something that we need to be at a maturity stage to be able to do with more data, more AI, stuff like that. The other main frustration of the company, besides trying to convince investors, and especially now at the early stage, the seed stage is looking really positive, but trying to get early money in the gaming industry in Eastern Europe for a company that doesn't monetize early is quite a challenge. The other biggest challenge with the company in general has always been designers. We've been through about 13 or 14 of them now, and it almost feels like we're cursed with this. I don't know if I've heard similar sentiments from other entrepreneurs, and it's a challenge because designers are emotional, they take their work very seriously, and that allows them to create like amazingly unique, special things. But at the same time, trying to give feedback or not necessarily implementing everything that happens or pivoting features based on new discoveries hurts their feelings. Or a lot of them are contracting and they have to say yes to all the work that they get because they don't know if they'll have work later. So they reprioritize things or work part-time on things, and it's just kind of a mess. And a full-time designer usually hasn't been appropriate until around now when the team is bigger and we have so much to do on a backlog. So looking for a designer again, because the last one basically doesn't like that we're a startup and the way that we're operating. I also want to talk to her and figure out more about this because it's been such a pattern. I want to know more insights into it. But also with a lot of designers, they just kind of flake off rather than tell you what's happening. It's been a repeated trend. So I'd really like that to not happen. And I'd also really like to be able to work with the girl I'm dating now because she's very reliable and would be in the office and it would just be a lot easier. But she also has an art background, not as much design background. So again, delegated that decision to somebody who's not me because I'm biased. Something else from last week is met a guy through an investor who actually referred me to this Polish program. And the person I met, Jacob, is working with Coca-Cola on esports tournaments. And they are like basically mobile things that are having a pilot at a big 600,000 person music festival. And I proposed essentially using GameTree as a way to tell these people that they can make friends at the event, because a lot of people go to events to make friends, and it's hard to know who's the best person to talk to or have a reason to talk to them. So GameTree can solve a lot of those problems for events, and that would be a good check for us to be able to take that model and then give it to other events in the future. And that also helps us grow, which is the most important thing. And also we could give sort of analytics to them, the esports platform and Coca-Cola about the psychographics and the taste profiles and stuff of the people who like their products. And a lot of the times companies have to pay a lot of money for that information. So hopefully that deal goes through. But we'll see. There's a lot of stuff that's always in the air, and it's hard to seal things when you're a new company and kind of a small player. So another one instance of this is a concierge app that somebody is starting. They want to essentially make it so that when you go somewhere, instead of talking to concierge at a hotel for places to go or trying to get like access to exclusive restaurants and clubs and stuff, usually a little bit higher end, this person wants to have like an app for it. So I gave him a lot of advice from the tech to the hospitality industry about how to go doing this roadmap. But it turns out that with him, he's interested in using GameTree as a way to have taste profiles for people that you can give to the concierges and personalized interactions, knowing like how the person thinks and how they value and what's important to them, what kinds of things that might be fun, and then as it scales, be able to have more data-driven activities as well and recommendations. So that's another sort of interesting implication of the kinds of ways that we can use the data, because there's too many to like ever even like think about, and there's nobody else really who can kind of provide this sort of stuff. And so Friday, I reached out to like 250 different media agencies that we have that we basically researched over time, and basically had 0 responses. And I don't know if I'm really bad at PR. Daniel's also tried. It's just so hard to get people to write about you. I think what we're doing is interesting, and our organic growth is pretty high. But I think it was just without relationships, or I don't know what it is, but it's really frustrating. So that's been challenging as well, to be able to get those sorts of people to write about us. But having even just like one nice article and a major periodical could help a lot, because that starts to create a domino effect, or is at least something that we could show off to others. So that's another struggle point that we're going through right now. And so we have an idea to next try like making a printout of sort of, instead of sending an email, sending a letter to people, and then like signing it. And so they have something physical, it'll stand out, it'll be kind of nicely designed, and maybe that'll actually draw their attention more and stick out. And a lot of these people do have addresses because they're used to receiving like products or things to review or to talk about. So maybe that'll break through the noise a bit if some of these journalists are getting hundreds or thousands of messages per day. I know that's possible to even personalize stuff to the journalists, and even ones who I've met in person at events, like they sound very interested, and they're like, oh yeah, like there's like, I think there's some good stories in this, send me something, and then they never follow up or never do stuff. So I need to figure out more what's going on in that world. Psychologically, I have like introverted feeling and introverted intuition, and the people who do best in this are the ones with extroverted functions, or they're looking for information and resonate with the tribe more. So it's a very different language than I'm used to, and that's also something I would consider when hiring somebody to help do this in the future, is do they have those skills if they're a journalist, or if they're somebody who's interacting with those kinds of people. We also created a feature prioritization system, essentially weighting what is important based on our KPIs, our key product indicators for the company. And we pegged a new user to a 1, which would scale based on the acquisition costs later of what a user is, and especially once we know profitability, it's easier to benchmark stuff. But if a user is a 1, that's like a user without anything else isn't that valuable. And then we put, using the golden ratio, the user's data at like 1.6 or 1.7, like scaling up to that, going up to weekly retention, monthly retention, and how many days they log in per month. So kind of being able to decide if we're prioritizing a feature, how it affects these metrics and how many points they get helps us know, for example, when we're redesigning the app or deciding between features, which thing is the most important, what's the most like profitable decision based on our goals and metrics. And so this is something that Yuha, the guy who we were hosting each other from London, had suggested. It seems like a good system, and so we'll try it out, but I don't know if it's actually going to be that useful, or if at the end of the day we're just going to go with our intuitions and just do what feels right. Even this sort of a system has a lot of wiggle room until we have more metrics with costs and profitability to decide what even the values are. So it's kind of like going to be very biased in that sense. But it does seem like nice to have a framework, and in general, just having frameworks to think about things is often better than not having any frameworks at all. It's kind of like language, where if you don't have words to describe things, it's hard to even understand concepts. Some good news is that I raised $10,000 from my sister and her boyfriend. That's going to help us, because right now we basically just have to keep money to keep things running. But any money we put in now is going to scale the user base and allow us to operate more fluidly. And I think it's going to add a lot more value going into the seed round. So that takes some pressure off. Also, I checked into an Okie Dokie hostel. I think I mentioned that at the beginning of the video, and just looking off of notes to remember these things. And the last bit of news from this week was that I went to like a contact improv ecstatic dance thing. It's sort of like Burning Man, you type vibes and people. And I've done it like maybe 2 or 3 times in the Bay Area and at Burning Man. Here it was interesting because there wasn't music. It was people moving around like without it, which makes it more authentic, but also a little bit harder to get into the groove too. But after a while, after feeling like leaving for a bit, felt a lot more comfortable. And somebody also was like kind of a master pianist, being able to make up tunes that would go on and off. And it ended up being really cool, and I became friends with the person at the piano. He was also doing this kind of like Mongolian guttural throat singing, where it kind of like resonates the entire room and like has like a simultaneously high and low pitch. And so he was kind of teaching me how to do that. We ended up hanging out afterwards in that evening, and then it turns out that he's actually, like, in addition to a musician, like a pretty legit data scientist, and we have a lot of common values and interests. So we might actually end up being work like coworkers or partners or something, either on GameTree at this stage or with the grant in the future and the R&D. He really likes the big picture of what we're doing, and he was one of the first people working on supercomputers. So that was just like a very interesting happenstance. I forget the word for like a purposeful meeting. But yeah, that was a nice end to the week. And then also meeting some interesting people when I got back to the hostel and hanging out with them that week. Some interesting stuff from this morning, but I'll leave that into the next week's blog update. And again, if you guys have questions or there's certain things that you prefer to hear about, or if you want more lessons out of this or more updates with the product or community or whatever it is, let me know, because I'm doing this to ideally fit into whatever you want to know. So don't hesitate to write those things.